All right. What do we think? Should we make a start?
Sure.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone, and happy Friday. We're all really excited to be here today, and really grateful to all of you for attending, and I suppose having the opportunity to speak to you all about e-invoicing and the combined power of SpendConsole and SAP solutions. Um, I guess on behalf of the team from Bloom and SpendConsole and SAP, we'd really like to thank the ATO, first of all, for this opportunity, and also for all of their support in driving the topic of e-invoicing and its importance in the Australian context. As many of the stakeholders here or the attendees will know, electronic invoicing is a very important tool. Manual invoicing is a thing of the past. It slows us down. And I think historically, it's been very difficult to unify all of those various invoicing channels into one console, into one experience where we can drive efficiency and compliance, and of course, support our business in doing the right thing. Now, although we know that e-invoicing and accounts payable is a really interesting and engaging topic, we do very much understand the need to keep it light. So we encourage attendee interaction through the chat pane, where we'll moderate some of your questions. And of course, we can round out at the end of the session for some questions and answers. Okay, so now let's get into it. My name's Daniel Jackson, and I'm a director with Bloom Consulting. Now, we're a homegrown procurement transformation consultancy, and we were actually the first independent partner of SAP Ariba in the Australian region. We're really fortunate to have worked with some of the most iconic and complex Australian organisations to deliver successful procurement transformation programs. Now, one thing that we will say is that each of our organisations that we've worked with is very different, and lots of different challenges exist in the market, especially around that invoice-to-pay cycle, which is the topic of today. But for the purposes of this session, I'm going to be your facilitator. Now let's meet our presenters. With us today, we've got Jared Wellings from the ATO. Jared, we really appreciate you being here. Jared is a relationship manager with the ATO and has been part of the driving force behind this push for e-invoicing and payable, which we know is so important for all businesses here in the region. We also have Abid Ali from SpendConsole, and Abid's our resident evangelist for the invoice-to-pay cycle. I don't think there are many people in Australia or in the region, for that matter, who have more scars from invoice-to-pay programs and procurement transformation programs than Abid. I'd also like to welcome Nikolai and Stephen from SAP. Between the two of them, they've worked with some of Australia's most complex organisations from a procurement transformation perspective, and developed some really nifty solutions to help solve some of their problems. So between that team there, I reckon there's at least 70 years worth of procurement transformation experience. And trust me, Abid certainly had hair at the beginning of all of that. Let's have a quick talk through the plan of attack for the day. First up, we're going to hear from Jared on the ATO's perspective on e-invoicing and some of the context. What are some of the key drivers around why this is important and why it's important now that organisations start thinking about this. Next, we're really lucky to have the CEO of the Fulton Francis Group, Brett Fulton, who's going to share some of his experiences in managing some of the world's most complex invoicing scenarios, leveraging SpendConsole. Thanks so much, Brett, for being here today. We really, really appreciate it. After that, we're going to hear from Abid Ali, our SpendConsole evangelist, who's going to walk through some of his observations on the challenges facing organizations from an invoicing and procurement perspective. And I think really importantly, as part of that, what are the levers that we can pull upstream of the invoicing process, as well as downstream, to make sure that we drive an efficient and effective process. Finally, Nick and Abid are going to talk about the combined power of SAP and SpendConsole solutions, which really go hand in hand in a lot of scenarios. And then finally, of course, some of you might be interested today in actually having a bit of an understanding of some of the personas that actually exist in that invoice-to-pay process and how SpendConsole is going to make their life a whole lot better. So with that in mind, perhaps Jared, I'll pass over to you. And we can talk a little bit about the background of e-invoicing and why it's important today.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you for the warm welcome. It is e-invoicing week and excited to go. So, all right, so we might head into the presentation and an overview of what e-invoicing is. So I might start off first of all with one of the common misconceptions about what e-invoicing is, because many businesses today think they are e-invoicing. So in the top there, you can see through the slide deck clearly, there is that process where suppliers are generating an invoice from a PDF. They're then attaching it to an email and then sending it to their buyers, who manually scan that invoice into an accounting system or an ERP. So lots of manual processes. That is not the e-invoicing that we're talking about today. The e-invoicing we're talking about is that future world streamlined process, standardized way and structured way of sending invoice data through a network known as payable. It is a secure network there as well, and it allows the invoice to be sent directly from a supplier's software to a buyer's software, irrespective of the software that each of them are using. It'll show up in the buyer system, ready for approval and payment. So very clear visual there that, you know, it cuts down a number of steps there, manual processing and stuff like that. So we might go into a bit of detail in terms of how this network works and how e-invoicing works. So we might go on to the next slide here. All right, so how does e-invoicing work? So as mentioned, e-invoicing uses an open international standard based on the payable framework. So payable is not something new. It's been around for over 10 years. It's in operation in over 40 countries. So it provides interoperability, not just in Australia, but from a global perspective. So if you have suppliers overseas, you can use this network to trade with and send and receive invoices. It's an open network, so as long as your trading partners are registered on this network, you can send and receive invoices to them, and it's supported by a legal framework that defines governance and the roles of the parties within the network. So we'll touch on the ATO's role a little bit later, not right now, but the ATO is the payable authority within that network, and we set requirements for the service providers, and then that framework also applies to the service providers in the network, which, if we look at this four-corner model, gives a visual of how the payable network operates. So you've got a supplier on corner one who can send an invoice and through their software. They connect to parties within the network called access points, who can locate participants who are registered on the network and then ensure that the invoice is sent directly to the buyer's system. So another way to think of these access points is like a telecommunications provider. So in the telecommunications network, you have people using Optus, Vodafone on their payment times, and e-invoicing could be a mechanism to support faster payment times there. One thing I will definitely stress is that the ATO cannot view invoice data. If you take your mind back to the prior slide, within that network, you can't see any ATO in that picture because the data sits within the software system. Whether it be the suppliers or the buyers, it sits within those software systems, and the access points and parties within the market are just sending that data through the network. All right, so we might go on to the final slide here. So the benefits. So it saves you time. So when you consider the manual processing aspect of how invoices are largely processed today, you know, there's manual data entry, keying of information. There's a chance to send that information to the wrong email address potentially. So e-invoicing removes that barrier. It can automate processes, and it can ensure that the invoice is sent to the right participant. So one of the things that is involved in e-invoicing is an electronic address based on your ABN. So you know that your participants in the network are going to receive that invoice. It is reliable and secure. So the service providers within the network have to meet a range of requirements to ensure that the network is secure and robust. When compared to other channels like email, in 2020, there was $128 million through business email compromise scans. That went up in 2021 to $228 million. So it's an emerging threat there, where I guess malicious actors are looking to change bank account details on received invoices so that you make fraudulent payment. And unfortunately, a lot of those payments, they're not recovered. So it's an emerging threat there, and email as a channel is heavily targeted. So that saves you time and faster payment are kind of aligned there. And I mean, we've got the policy, like I mentioned, the supplier pay on time policy. So not only as a mechanism, but there is some policy to support that as well. The connect once, trade with money. So it's a key principle of payable that if your trading partners are on the network, whoever's on there, you can trade with them agnostic to the software that they're using. So that's a key benefit as well. And then better for the environment. So, there's the ESG compliance at a board level. eInvoicing is an avenue to help businesses achieve their goals there. So I think that's the benefits. I might just, I might hand back over to you now, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. I think it's some really important messages in there, around the benefits for supplying organizations, but also buying organizations in terms of being able to receive, compliant invoices in a really efficient and effective way, which is a problem that so many buying side organizations grapple with often. Thanks so much for that, Jared. Next, I might pass to Abid to perhaps run a little bit of a Q&A and learn about some of the experiences of Brett Fulton, the president of the Fulton Francis Group. Abid, over to you.
Hey, thanks, DJ. So we're very lucky to have Brett here with us. Brett, thank you so much for being here. Brett, you've been a customer for quite a long time using SpendConsole, so we'd love to hear from your journey, your experience. And I think the area you operate in is probably one of the most complex when it comes to invoicing. So please tell us a bit about yourself and the Fulton Francis Group.
Thanks, Abid, and nice to be here and to meet everybody here today. I suppose, a long time is the correct terminology. We've been working with you for over 10 years now in relation to issues that we faced some time ago with our growth, being a local Australian company, moving overseas, initially to the US, then the UK, and now globally. We had a lot of different invoices coming in many different formats, and we had to have the ability to be able to not only consolidate those, but validate them against contracted rates, and then have them in a format that then could be uploaded directly into ERP for our clients. And our clients were major banks like Macquarie Bank, American Express, and Johnson & Johnson throughout the world. So it was sort of something that was thrust upon us quickly, down even to user level. So we had all of this complexity, and we were able to work with Arbit and the SpendConsole team to come up with a solution that would be able to take all of these different formats. And we're talking about invoices with over 2,000 lines individually, and then had to be consolidated with other suppliers as well. And also other software systems like secure printing and all of those types of things that would do that. We had issues along the way where we would receive supplier invoices not against contracted rates, and this is tens of thousands of dollars that across like global organisations that we were able to recoup through implementing the SpendConsole platform. And that's probably a critical piece for us, is that contracted rate piece, is that if I could count it, I could count it. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've identified on behalf of our clients. So we're independent of supplier, so we broker and manage those solutions for them. So any benefit over and above the solution that we provide, invoicing is a key part of that, is something that is looked upon us fondly as well. So it helps us not only support our current clients, but then maintain them for further terms.
Wow, thank you so much, Brett. And maybe for the audience, maybe helpful for everyone to understand, what does Fulton Francis Group do? What do you provide to your customers?
Very good, very good. I should have started there. So we're obviously a managed print organisation. So we go into our customers and identify what they have, how they're utilising it, how much it's costing, and then put forward better ways of ways. Digital transformation is a piece, digitising documents, all of the things that are boring to most people. But those are the things that we do for our clients, and then we maintain that for them over the term. So we manage that fleet for them from implementation through to service, and obviously billing there that we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm. No, very interesting. And I think when I started working with Brett all those years ago, whenever I would go back to my office and look at that office printer was sitting, I would just think of, okay, this is the business. So Fulton Francis really manages all of those printers. Yeah. So how many, just to give everybody a bit of an idea, so how many printers do you manage today, Brett?
We're at 30,000 currently globally with our clients.
Yeah.
So we work a little bit differently than most. We targeted approach to our clients. So Tinto, ISS, those types of clients with 300,000 people. They're the types of things that we do in multiple countries. So we're in 17 countries with Rio Tinto, and we're up to 42 with ISS. And moving, but across all different. So K&L Gates globally is one of ours. Greif, largest packaging company as well. They're in all diverse types of situations as well. It's not just one, whether it's legal or finance or whatever. They're across mining. They're across every agriculture. They're across everything. So it's sort of what this solution has enabled us to do is provide a common platform for all industries.
No, very good. Thank you. And in the invoices, when you receive an invoice, what are some of the group typical charges? What do you get charged for, Brett?
Yeah, so we've got software charges, we've got utilization charges, which are based on click rate for copies. We've got staple charges and peripherals. We've got service charges. There's all different charges that make up that, and that hence the complexity of those invoices and being able to consolidate them and have a consistent format globally. That's been the main thing for us. But you bring all that together, validating against contracted rate. Obviously, I am pushing that because that is the biggest issue that we face. And then being able to put that out into or export it into a format that can be uploaded into their systems and they know it's been validated.
Yeah. And so you've got a pretty diverse supplier base as well. Tell us a little bit about what your experience has been like getting your suppliers to invoice you in a certain format. Are they receptive to that, or they tend to use their own systems? What your experience has been like?
They've all got their own systems, and even locally, like even within the APAC region. So Australia's got different invoicing formats for these companies, as does Singapore, Hong Kong, China, wherever we're dealing. They've all got different formats. So that again is something that, and again, the benefit of having the system is that we can take all of those different formats. We don't need the one format, and we don't need to dictate to our clients or our suppliers what format we need. We're able to be agile in that regard through the system.
Very good. And Brett, your business has grown quite significantly, and I see that as one of those local Australian success stories, really, right? And so what does the future hold for your business, and where are you heading, and what role do you think SpendConsole will play in that?
Yeah, well, we are heading into all aspects of printing. So whether it's office, home-based, being able to capture that with the move to home office printing, there's a whole other category there that is not being captured, and spend is exploding because people are utilising their home printers, and security is another aspect that is huge in that as well. So telling people not to print is one thing, but having them adhere to that is another. So we're working with Microsoft and others to put a secure, compliant platform in place so that all of our clients can monitor and manage not only their office printing but their home printing as well. So all the good security features there, and obviously the SpendConsole piece fits in nicely with what we're offering in the market now.
Very good. So look, thank you so much for your time. And it sounds like the pandemic has almost helped propel some growth in your business. Would that be the right statement? Where people are printing from home now, and it's a new challenge as well.
Yeah, no, it has, and it's something that needs to be managed. It can't be let go, because it could come back to bite a number of companies, particularly from a security and compliance point of view. We're trying to get ahead of that game. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, look, we're all working from home, and hence this webinar, not a seminar. Working from home is very much a norm. I have a printer sitting just under my desk, and I think that's the case with everybody. And printing documents, company documents on that printer is insecure, not secure. So I think you're onto something quite important there. So look, thank you so much for your time, Brett, and we look forward to continue to partner with you with your next challenge and grow with your business. So please stay for as long as you want. We've got some good content that you will find useful. So that was Brett Fulton. Thank you so much, Brett.
Thanks.
Great. All right. So look, I'll carry on, and what we just looked at is an intro from Jared around e-invoicing, the ATO's role, and why it is important. We heard from Brett, whose business is quite unique and manages probably some of the most complex invoices that I've seen. I've been in the industry for roughly 20 years, and for my sins, as I like to say, I fell into this space of helping customers with their procurement and payments problem. My background is in software development. I was educated as a software engineer, and I spent the first few years of my career building various types of software applications for the likes of Commonwealth Bank and some of the government departments. The very first invoicing product me and my team developed was a payment requisition solution. There are some people here from CBA. Well, I understand that solution is still floating around somewhere, used in some area. This thing was developed roughly 18 years ago. So before we get into solution, I wanted to take a quick view of what the problem looks like, and let's look at a bit of a history. And at this point, maybe DJ, no, you're going to continue on these slides, so that's great. So look, let's take a step back, right? So let's take a bit of a pause. Let's take a step back. So we all know trade has been around for a very long time, from the Egyptians and even maybe before. We have been trading goods and services, and we have been paying for those for a very long time, right? So all the way from the Egyptians, the ancient Rome, I think one point in the history where William the Conqueror, as we understand, started to mandate business transactions so that he could collect tax. And that's a very important milestone in the history. Now, we know ATO's role is not that, or at least that's what we've been told, but fun jokes and fun side. So that was one of the key milestones, right? But fast forward in the recent years, I believe most of the people here are very much familiar with the old days of fax machines, post, email, and as the technology revolution started, sometimes in the mid to late 90s, we've seen tremendous growth in this whole area as to how businesses communicate with each other, right? So there was these days of a fax machine. And I remember going as a kid to my dad's office when he would send a purchase order literally through a fax machine, which would go to his supplier in China, and the Chinese supplier would send an invoice back through the fax machine. So that was my very early introduction of how businesses were communicating with each other. Fast forward, we know there was email, and then we entered this era of connected systems. So suppliers started to use technology systems, buyers started to use technology systems, and then came the era of business-to-business networks, right? So there's a lot of supplier networks, there's a lot of supplier portals, and what we saw, a very fast growth in the 2000s and in the last 2 decades. As technology is evolving and as our business is evolving, where we are at today is the world of artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things. We've all heard those buzzwords, and open networks. One of the challenges that business networks, at the same time, it facilitated a lot of trade and finance, but at the same time, it meant both suppliers and buyers had to connect to this network, had to use the software to be able to communicate with each other. Now, that scenario suits very well to a segment of our supplier base, but we also have a supplier base that requires freedom and flexibility. So today we're in the age of artificial intelligence, machine learning, open networks, freedom of using tools and products that what we would like, because there's tons of them, right? Me as a supplier, I have at least half a dozen options of which accounting systems can I use. And as a buyer, we have a lot of customers on this call today. You now have the option to use whatever systems you want to use, right? So that then creates a bit of a challenge. So a little bit of a history of what has happened and where are we at today. So on to the next slide, I wanted to take that one step forward. And what we know as our reality, that our supplier base is quite diverse. We have suppliers all the way from our strategic suppliers, which our business relies on, and all the way from strategic suppliers to tactical and ad hoc suppliers. So a given customer could have thousands of suppliers. I mean, I've worked with customers who have all the way, from 5,000 or 1,000 to literally 20, 30,000 suppliers. Now, each of those suppliers is quite different and unique. They have their own needs. Strategic suppliers might require integration with their backend systems, their purchase order fulfillment systems, their shipping systems, their invoicing systems, because their requirement and their technology maturity is quite high. Whereas if we have operational suppliers, they just want, freedom and flexibility, because they may not, as a buyer, we may not be one of their most strategic customer, for example, contractors, service providers, etc. Then we have tactical and ad hoc suppliers. These guys just want ease of doing business. They don't want to be told to use a certain system or pay a certain fee. They just want freedom and flexibility. So then the challenge then becomes, as a customer, how do we have a single digital platform which caters for the needs of my broad supplier base who have various technical level of maturity? And I'm looking at it from an AP point of view. I'm looking at it from an invoice-to-pay point of view, obviously, right? And that really becomes our the definition of the problem. If we break it down into the accounts payable process, so let's go to the next slide. I think everybody who may be familiar or has worked in AP or is maybe procurement would be familiar with this process. So accounts payable is not just a payments problem. It's not just an invoice processing problem. An invoice to pay process, and this is how I'd like to summarize it. It starts all the way from onboarding our suppliers. So we need to onboard suppliers, capture their information, that is ABN numbers, their bank account details, their contacts, and then do some compliance checks, right? So we as a buying organization, obviously cannot onboard any supplier. There are some compliance checks and record management that has to happen, right? Obviously, that then has to be integrated with our procurement systems. And what we see in our procurement systems, we have multiple ways to buy. We buy goods, we buy services, we buy simple items like stationery, and then we buy really complex items like a construction project, which has several milestone payments and has services and materials and could be a multi-million-dollar, multi-year engagement. From that point, we move into obtaining or capturing the invoice. When a supplier sends us the invoice, we need to be able to capture that. We need to be able to validate that, approve that, and finally all the way to payments, and then be able to report on that. That's really loosely the end-to-end process. At each of those points, we have some key challenges. So for example, when we onboard a supplier, we need to make sure that their details are correct. When we capture the invoice, we need to be able to capture all different formats of those invoices coming from various channels, just like what Brett described. And how do we then standardize that and validate that? Now that we've captured the invoice, what do we do with it? We need to allocate it to our cost center, GL. We need to make sure goods receipting is done. We need to make sure the approvals are in place. So although electronic invoicing provides us this great platform that we're able to bring invoices in an electronic format, we still have to validate them. We still have to get them approved in time so that we can pay the supplier on time, right? So that's the end-to-end, just setting the context, that's the end-to-end invoice-to-pay process. Right? So at this point, what I might do is hand back to DJ, and then DJ will introduce Nick and Stephen.
Thanks so much for that, Arbit. It was really insightful hearing about some of the context and the history of the invoicing problem, and I agree. It's a very interesting parallel to draw with William the Conqueror, tracking business transactions. As Arbit mentioned in that part of the webinar, the payable and e-invoicing component of that end-to-end process is a very, very important part of that problem and solving that. But as we all know, as business practitioners, there's both an upstream process, as Arbit just walked through, and a downstream process from that invoice capture perspective. I'd like to now pass to Nikolai and Stephen to tell us a little bit about some of SAP's observations on the procurement process and some of the important things to consider when making sure upstream that we've got our purchasing documents in the right format, distributed in the right way, and the importance of that to facilitate a smooth downstream process. Nikolai, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, DJ. Nick here. Hope you're all well. Super excited to be on this webinar today. Look, myself and the team of consultants, we look after our customers, including those who are on the call here, and we have seen many procurement challenges all the way through to invoicing, including invoicing. So I'm really interested in the topic, especially around SpendConsole and payable, because we are forever trying to help our customers. So Stephen, maybe you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Stephen McDougall. I'm an account exec with SAP located in Canberra, and I work with federal government customers and the southern states. And shout out to Delia and Tom, who you'll see in the chat. They're my counterparts for New South Wales and Queensland. Yeah, this is a complex. Yeah, hey, nice wave. This is a complex topic, and I often have customers come to me. With complex problems and in this space, and we have to put together a solution. And what I like about SpendConsole is it takes some of the moving parts that we would otherwise have to custom build and puts them into a package, and it's a very easy message for the customer, and it reduces the risk and increases the chance of success, really. So really happy to be here supporting a good SAP partner in Bloom.
DJ, if you can go to the next slide. Look, as Arbit alluded to, and I think Stephen highlighted, this is a complex area. And from our perspective at SAP, a lot of this relies on having a solid procurement process before the invoice. The invoice essentially is the end of the journey. And in many cases, what we see is, you can't just automate an invoice on its own. You really need to look at the full process, the source to pay process, to be able to achieve those benefits. And this is not just around compliance. This is all the way through to automation, making sure those invoices clear correctly. And sometimes it doesn't really matter how the invoice got in, whether it was electronic invoice or scanned invoice or maybe even payable invoice. If you don't have the procurement channels and you don't have the whole notion of contract and requisition and approval set up correctly, then by and large, what we'll find that invoice probably won't go through automatically, and it'll need to be handheld by someone with an accounts payable, and that's daunting. And additionally to all of that, we see a lot of additional complexity on how the purchasing process begins. So it's not as simple as just saying, look, I've got a material, there's a purchase requisition, a purchase order, a receipt, and an invoice. On paper, that sounds pretty easy. But in practice, that's not how it works. We find that there's different ways things can be bought. Sometimes not even a purchase order exists. You might just have a contract, and that's where the invoices need to land against to be able to process and pay. You'll find that we look at the way that organization buy and dissect by different procurement channels is probably a way to improve things and try to standardize things. You'll see here on the screen, we've got a couple of approaches. So we've got user-driven procurement, in other words, catalog procurement or free text procurement, and sometimes that might even be related to some sort of an expense or, as mentioned, a purchasing process against a contract. Additionally, is further complexities with services procurement. Ordering something like a statement of work and getting something that's not really a material, you can't really, receipt it as such. You need to confirm that the service was done, and often enough, the invoice comes in before that receipt is made, so it needs to be held. And then plan-driven procurement is another matter. This is automation within an ERP system, making sure that your materials are set up correctly, making sure that there's connectivity within your suppliers and getting all the prices and part numbers and units of measure correctly. That also is a bit of a daunting task. And what we find, as Abid alluded to, is there's new ways that things are coming in. So, for example, IoT device, automatic purchasing, MIP purchasing has been around for years, but still there's improvements in the area. And all of this just creates an enormous complexity on how invoices need to be processed, right? What my message to you folks here is, don't consider the invoicing mechanism as a one place to improve things. You really need to get your procurement right, all the way from sourcing, contracting, purchasing, cataloging, to be able to achieve those benefits on the invoicing side. Next slide, DJ, if you can. The other thing to mention, the other additional caveat to all of this is there's many buying systems. Within SAP itself, we've got a number of solutions that our customers are using. We've got customers using the older ECC purchasing processes and also SRM. A few customers have converted to S4HANA, and in itself, that's a purchasing system, and it creates compliant purchase orders, correct contracts and so forth. And additionally, we've got customers using SAP Ariba, such as SAP Ariba Buying or Guided Buying, to be able to create those purchase orders and requisitions and so forth. And look, many other purchase systems exist out there. This is not just about SAP. There's customers and organizations that use other procurement systems to create demand and purchases. And what's important to understand is SpendConsole, the product that Bloom will be presented shortly, can operate with any of these systems in terms of invoice processing. It's agnostic of the system of record that the purchase order is generated, and it will suit any of these systems here on the screen, as well as other purchasing processes. Maybe back to you, Abid, for the rest of the show. Look forward to it.
Thanks, Nick. That was really good presentation. Thank you so much. So guys, let's take a bit of a pause, a bit of a breather. We just heard quite a lot of content, and I know it's at times it's difficult to absorb it all. So take a deep breath. And the next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about SpendConsole. What is it really? And I'm really excited to and pleased to actually bring you what we have developed. So what I might do is, DJ, if I might take over the screen share so I can drive it. Hopefully that was a smooth transition. Can everybody see my screen? See, when technology works, it works smoothly.
Yep.
When it does work, right? So all right. So let's talk about what SpendConsole is. So Nick, talk to us about each of us as our buying organization, maybe using a different procurement system. Yeah, different types of procurement, different types of invoices, invoice channels. We looked at that. We looked at our supplier base, how that is quite diverse. We have all the way from, big suppliers, the likes of Staples and COS and HPs and DXCs of the world. And we then have mom and pop suppliers, right? Or we have teachers. One of our very important customers, TAFE New South Wales, have casual teachers who come in, run a session or run a class once a week, and they send their invoice. They just want to get paid for their time, right? So that is the whole supplier base. So how do we solve that problem, right? So essentially what SpendConsole's mission is to effortlessly communicate with your suppliers, right? And this is the agenda we're driving for our customers and buying organization. Make it really easy for our supplier base, because that will in turn make our internal processes as buying organizations easy. We believe in that, and that has come from, at least 2 decades of implementing procurement technology. We're very good at doing change internally within the buying organization, because that's where the focus is, that's where the money is, that's where the stakeholders are. But what we often neglect or are not able to do properly is make it easy for our supplier base. So the whole mission of our SpendConsole, or I should say one of the main missions, is to really make it easy for suppliers to provide their documents in a format using a channel that suits them best. So what SpendConsole does, if I was to run from left, is provides multiple channels. Suppliers can email their invoice in a format that suits them. They can send us a PDF, whether it's digital, handwritten, structured, unstructured, whatever that may be. They can log in through a mobile device or their desktop and upload an invoice. They can create that invoice, do a purchase order flip, upload an Excel, doesn't matter. They can send us an invoice via eInvoice or the PayPal network, those who are enabled on the PayPal network, right? Or they can integrate with their system. So we've made it really easy for suppliers, and we continue to invest in that area to provide us their invoices, their documents in a simple way. And not only that, get to see what's happening with their invoice. So now that they've sent their invoice, when is it going to get paid? Does it have an issue? Does it require their action? So really making that whole area simple. One of the core area which we have spent and invested a lot of energy is the whole AI engine, or the artificial intelligence engine. Essentially what it does, it has the ability to extract the invoice information and bring it into a standard format. We heard from Brett earlier on how difficult it is to enforce a standard to suppliers. So rather than doing that, we're using technology to bring all of that data into a standard format. Now, once we have that data in the standard format, the core engine within SpendConsole is all around validation. So we simply call it validation, but it is essentially reconciliation, reconciling that invoice against the purchase order, against the contracted rates, against general ledger, against cost center, making sure it has the necessary approvals, whether those are delegations, financial, operational approvals, or goods receiving approval. So that's the whole validation engine. And that's where, again, we use a lot of AI, ML type of technologies to really improve that area and make it efficient. Everybody who's worked in AP, we know how complex that could be. Once we have a clean invoice, a standard clean invoice, we can then integrate that invoice into one of your backend systems. You could be running SAP ERP, you could be running S/4HANA, either in a public or a private cloud, or in a Ariba system, or one of your ERP. Now, some of you may be wondering that, Abid, I'm already using OpenTextWin, or I'm already using the Ariba network, and some of my suppliers are happily invoicing them. So where does this all fit in? There is no categorical answer we're giving to you. We're in the age of options. This is an option for you to consider. Your organization need may be quite different to another customer. You may be using Ariba, and let's say half of your suppliers are happily invoicing through Ariba. Great. And half of your suppliers are still sending you that PDF invoice, and that's where the problem lays. We can architect the solution and segment your suppliers and give them the right channel. We have a model available for each of those unique circumstances. That's my key message. So let's have a look at SpendConsole in a bit more detail. Have a look at the deep dive into the features, right? So if that's the platform, it takes invoices, extracts it, validates it, and it integrates it. Let's have a bit of a deep look at the features. So first and foremost, we have the ability to digitally onboard suppliers. If somebody's here from Gold Coast City Council, you would resonate. This would resonate. Typically, the process is to send a PDF document to the supplier and capture a bunch of information, including a copy of bank statements, ABN numbers, a bunch of other information that then somebody receives it via email and does manual compliance checks. So fast forward to the age of digital world. We can digitally send a request to the supplier, capture all of that detail. In real time, we can call the ASIC register to make sure that ABN and ACN is correct. We can validate the bank account, we can capture insurance certificates, etc. So the system's doing all of those compliance checks and managing that digital record. We can also integrate that supplier record with your backend vendor master. Second, as I mentioned before, capturing invoices in various formats. Whether it's a PDF, structured, unstructured, Excel, invoice, whatever. We have the ability to capture invoices using multiple channels. Validation, I've touched on before. Digital workflows. So our stakeholders out in the business do not want to be dealing with email, paper, handline. It's amazing to see how many customers are still hand signing documents and hand approving documents. So we have digital approvals where you can digitally approve an invoice or a purchase order. You can attach supporting documents, and a complete audit history is tracked, and it is as good or even better than a hand signature because it's kept in digitally, right? We have insights-driven analytics. So now that we have all of this data, what do we do with it? So we're helping our finance friends to come up with those finance reports, commitments, accruals in a really, really, really good fashion. And again, it's amazing to see how many of those finance teams every month or quarter have to chase that data and query multiple systems to come up with what the organization's commitments are. In SpendConsole, we're providing that in a real-time fashion, so at any point you can see what your commitments and accruals are. One of the most exciting features we're working on, which is due for Q3 release sometime in late September, October, is we are using AI to categorize or classify all of this spend data. So we know how difficult this problem is. End users are almost always wondering, how do they categorize their purchase? A lot of our spend is still on free text. Catalogs and contracts do not exist. So rather than relying on a business user who may not understand procurement, who may not understand UNSPSCs, we are using AI to look at the line item description, the supplier, and applying various other criteria to categorize and classify that spend. That would be then useful for our finance and procurement friends. We have ready integrations with S4HANA, SAP ERP, Ariba Network. The system's gone through quite a significant due diligence by SAP themselves. So we are able to bring to you some ready integrations that we can get you up and running relatively quickly. The system's obviously designed with enterprise-grade security and privacy control in mind. It's all designed and built and hosted in Australian shores. We are really proud to say that. A number of our government customers have that very important requirement to know where the data is held. It's all kept in Australian shores, and it's all compliant and secure. We have support for global support for multiple languages and currencies, and for some of our customers, it's quite important. So in the interest of time, what I might do is have a quick look at some of the key personas, and I'm going to give you a quick tour of the solution. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time for a very detailed demo. I'm happy to do that. I love talking about this topic, so you can contact me at any time. But we're going to look at some key personas and what does it really mean in SpendConsole world. So let's talk about our AP friends. What's important for our AP friends? And I've spoken to AP teams throughout my career. One of their biggest bugbear is, Abid, I want all of those invoices in one single place. Why can't we have that? Why do I have system A, then system B, then system C? So I want a single place where all of my invoices are. Second, I don't want to be dealing with someone else's problem. One of the AP ladies described it, and I'll never forget this. And she said, Abid, my job is like I'm sitting at the end of the conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt is bringing all of this document to my desk every day, and I have to deal with everything. So the AP friends want to deal with exceptions, not the backlog. If it's not their problem, it shouldn't arrive in their queue, right? And second, they want to be seen as a value-added function and not some transactional people sitting behind the curtains, punching paper. That is really the goal. And we need to elevate the AP teams to be a value-added function and not a transactional team. And their frustrations are obviously, they're having to deal with paper, they're having to deal with multiple systems, etc. So in the SpendConsole world, we're tackling all of those challenges. We are routing the invoices to the right people so they can take action. AP is dealing with exceptions, not the backlog. We're automating the bulk of the process. We're giving them a bird's eye view of all invoices in one single place, whether they came via email, PayPal, whatever. Let's have a look at the suppliers. So for our suppliers, what's their goal? They want ease of doing business and what suits them best. They don't want to be dealing with multiple systems. They don't want to be, they don't want to incur significant cost of doing business. And I've seen examples where suppliers are deliberately adding to the contracted cost because they know it is really difficult to deal with that organization. We all know that is so true. And if we make it easier for suppliers to do business, we will see that benefit directly in the contracted price, right? And suppliers want to grow relationships. I have also seen examples where suppliers steer away from doing business with a certain organization because it's really hard. They're really hard to deal with. I never get paid. I'm always chasing my payments. So I'm going to go and focus on an organization that pays me on time. I think we can all relate to some of those issues. So what we're doing for suppliers, we're giving them a self-serve portal. They can log in, they can see where their invoices are at. They can use a system of their choice. They can see where their invoices are at. We're creating a digital experience, and it's all fee-free. There's no fees ever charged to the suppliers. For our business stakeholders, our business stakeholders are out there doing their job. It's not their job description doesn't include processing invoices, unfortunately. They have their own job description. They could be construction managers. They could be teachers. They could be project managers. They do not have the time and energy to be dealing with procurement issues and invoicing issues. So what is important to them? Order goods and services as they need, have a seamless experience. If something requires their approval, we need to send it to them in an efficient digital fashion, obtain their approval, and stop wasting their time. I know a lot of examples, and I know you will all relate with that. We have business who have employed quasi AP and administration teams who are dealing with their own internal invoice backlog. Well, in this day and age, we can help with that. So what are we doing for the business is we're using obviously AI. We're using a lot of comprehensive business rules to filter invoices that shouldn't even arrive in the organization. We validate those invoices, and we only route the invoice to the right person who needs to approve it. So they receive a digital experience. They can approve the invoices in a single, in an efficient manner. And second, we're giving them all of those key reports around how they're tracking on a purchase order, how they're tracking on a contract, what have they consumed, what's outstanding, what's in the pipeline. They can see all of that information very, very quickly. And finally, for our finance community, what's important? They, again, as I mentioned, they don't want to be querying 5 different systems to come up with an accrual report, which they cannot tell with confidence are the real accruals. And we know some of those finance managers, and some of them are in the audience you may be able to relate with. A lot of the finance teams at times cannot say with confidence what the true accruals, what the true commitments are. And at times it's that view is created after the fact, that okay, this is how much we paid last month and over the last 6 months, so this must be our liability. So what we're providing is some key reports to our finance friends to make their lives easy, right? What I will do now is do a very quick tour of the system and the experience that everybody receives. Can everybody see my screen? So this is what SpendConsole looks like, right? So I am currently logged in as an accounts payable admin person, right? So I log in as an accounts payable admin person. I've got this intuitive dashboard. I can see some graphs and charts. I can see how many invoices are confirmed, submitted, pending. I can see some recent purchase orders. I can personalize this thing. I have some notifications. So I've got a modern, easy to use interface right in front of me. Second, most importantly, I have all of my organization's invoices in one place, whether they're received via PayPal, whether they've come in online, which suppliers come in, whether they're PO, non-PO based, and all of that good data that you would expect an AP person to want to see. And I can toggle and see all of these invoices, and it's a very simple, intuitive inbox, right? What you can also see that the system is doing, validation based on comprehensive criteria. So if I'm open up an invoice, this is what it looks like. I can see where it's come from, and I can very quickly see that the system doesn't like this invoice. It says that the subtotal is wrong, and the supplier bank account doesn't match, etc., etc. So guess what? This invoice has to be fixed before it can be paid, and the system's highlighting all of those issues. As an AP person, I can also see my purchase orders, and these are all integrated from either SAP, ERP, Ariba, S/4HANA. So I've got one single cockpit. I don't have to open up various screens to look at what my POs are. I can see all of my suppliers, all of them in one place, and I can bring up supplier details very quickly, including their bank account and any insurance certificates that they've provided. So a lot of focus has been in making the experience very, very simple. I have an analysis tab where I can see some good pieces of analytics and information, and I can run all of my reports and dashboards in a very simple manner. Right? That's an AP experience. Let's look at a supplier's experience. So I'm logged in as Bloom. So Bloom is a supplier to SpendConsole. So excuse the complexity. Since we're running this demo, SpendConsole is registered as an access point, and Bloom is the supplier. So as a supplier, I get to see all of the invoices that I've sent to SpendConsole. I can see the status, what's happening with each of the invoices. And as a supplier, there are multiple models, right? One of the easiest way to send my invoices is through my inbox. I can simply go to an email address and attach a bunch of invoices and send it to SpendConsole. One of the models is that the supplier doesn't need to do anything else. I just attach these invoices and hit send, right? And if I'm only using email, I will receive email notifications that look like this. Very simple, very intuitive. Another way I can send an invoice is obviously using my own accounting system. So I have Xero right here. Some suppliers are using QuickBooks, Xero's, one of the many tools. So all I have to do is identify and bring up SpendConsole, type in my invoice, and as long as this invoice is sent as an electronic invoice, it will arrive in SpendConsole and go through the same level of validation and integrate with your backend systems. I can attach files. So you can see the flexibility suppliers now get. They don't need to log into another system. They don't need to think about anything. All they do is they generate an invoice however they like. So we just looked at an email experience, a Xero experience. Now, some suppliers may say, I can start to see value in SpendConsole. So what I want to do is create a login so I can see all of my invoices that are in one place, or all of the purchase orders that have been issued to me. Another experience suppliers can have is simply pull up the purchase order that's sent to them, see what's on the purchase order, and create an invoice, which in other words, we called a purchase order flip. The benefit of this is that they're invoicing directly against the purchase order line item. The system's doing all of the validation that a purchase order flip would do. For example, it's not going to allow them to invoice anything beyond what's on the purchase order, add any line items, etc. Right? So what we saw, while we have the flexibility of email and payable, we cannot apply the purchase order validation there. It has to come later on. So therefore, we've enabled this. Another way the supplier can send invoice is they can simply upload invoice in an Excel format, or they can choose a PDF format. So as you can start to appreciate, suppliers have multiple ways to send an invoice, right? Finally, I'll show you an experience of what the business users will see. So this is, I'm logged in as a business user. Again, they see a dashboard, but they only see invoices, obviously, that are assigned to them. They can open up an invoice, see all of that good detail around the invoice, what, how many steps that invoice has traveled through, and, either approve or deny that invoice, right? So that's a bit of a quick walkthrough of what SpendConsole looks like. So in the interest of time, what I'm going to do is do my final bit around how to go about on this journey. Now, some of you may be wondering, okay, everything that you've said makes sense, or I have a bunch of questions. How the hell do I move from this point onwards, right? So a typical SpendConsole implementation would have a planning phase. Will go through design and configure, validation, etc. Right? But these are the key things I'd like to highlight. One important bit is looking at the solution architecture. What are you using currently? Whether you're using SAP, whether you're using another ERP, whether you're using Ariba, looking at your supplier segmentation and analysis. What are your strategic suppliers? Who are your operational suppliers, ad hoc suppliers, and then starting to align buying and invoicing channels. Right? That's a very important piece of planning exercise. Then we move on to, confirming business rules. All right, what are your organization's specific business rules? Are you going to allow non-purchase order invoices? What does a purchase order look like? Do you want to allow invoices where the supplier haven't quite got key pieces of information right? That is, they haven't specified the purchase order, they haven't specified the requester. What are your business rules? So we're going to define those and configure those in the solution. Change management, huge importance on change management. How are you going to manage this change internally and with the supplier? And then going through the whole, a typical project, we'll get to validate, test it, change management, and then we start to deploy it either progressively or as a big bang, right? So conscious of time, what I might do is stop here. To summarize, we looked at e-invoicing, what that is, ATO's role, and to bust a common myth, ATO is not looking at these transactions. It's not in their interest. So, and I can attest to that. We looked at a very complex case study from Brett, and thank you so much for being here, Brett, who's been using this technology for quite a number of years, and they have one of the most complex challenges. We heard from SAP and their perspective on why it is important to get procurement right from the onset. We cannot pay an invoice if we haven't done the work up front, that is structuring our purchase order right, etc. Then we had a quick look at SpendConsole, right? So that is all we have for you folks, but we're very keen to hear from you. I'm sure you have some good questions for us. So let's use the chat pane and go through some of your questions. And maybe DJ, you can read out some key questions and we can go through it all.
Sure thing. Thanks, Abid. And I guess for all of the attendees, please do feel free to pop in any questions that you do have in the chat pane. And perhaps while that's happening, Abid, I'd be fascinated to hear from you about the paradigm shift in supplier validation. Our experience working with so many organizations, and I'm sure a lot of the attendees here can attest to that, is that when these manual invoices come into organizations, it becomes AP's problem. Right, it becomes AP's problem to interrogate the invoice, to understand who is the internal stakeholder who's responsible for that, to validate that the information's correct, to perhaps even call the supplier. Can you talk to us a little bit about the concept of supplier-led invoice validation and why that's so important?
Yeah, sure. So, and this whole approach evolved from I was working with one of my very dear customers, which I'll never forget, Railcorp New South Wales, right? And we had a challenge of, I think, roughly 30,000 invoices were stuck in the workflow that could not be paid, right? And as we started to go through these invoices, I started to see and observe that a lot of those invoices should not even be with Railcorp New South Wales because the supplier just hadn't done the right thing. That is, they hadn't addressed the invoice. Some of them were missing the ABN number. Some of the invoices where the purchase order was actually issued was not even specified. So we started to think that, okay, how can we use technology effectively to take the supplier on the journey? Because it is in their, they have a vested interest in getting paid on time, right? So one of the things SpendConsole does that as soon as the supplier sends the invoice, SpendConsole applies that comprehensive validation criteria. And where if there is an instance where supplier should be providing a piece of information, we route that invoice back to the supplier to say, hey, Mr. Supplier, thank you so much for sending your invoice. We'd love to pay you on time, but these are the two pieces of information that you need to supply to us. And supplier then digitally provides that piece of information. And the result of that then is less burden on AP, less burden on the business, and supplier is then feeling engaged in that point. So that's how we're resolving that problem.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that, Arvid. And maybe another follow-up question to that. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? Buzzwords that I think I understand. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that means in the context of SpendConsole and how that supports the validation process?
Yeah, great questions. And I got asked this question quite a lot, right? So look, artificial intelligence is the evolution of computer programs, how they've evolved. And it's really, in a nutshell, the ability to train or teach the computer program on some of the nuances. So there were days when we were given a problem and we would create a bit of a code to solve that very problem. But as we know, problem evolves, right? So what an artificial program code essentially has, a key thing is a feedback loop. So as the problem is evolving, there is a feedback loop, which the program then goes, all right, I've got this now new problem that I need to solve. How do I apply that in the SpendConsole world? So the OCR technology has been around for 100+ years. I was actually surprised to learn it's been a 100+ year technology, and it was in the 70s when the likes of Xerox started to commercialize it. What an OCR program does, it needs to be trained to scan a document. And what we typically do is say that, okay, go to coordinate X, Y, and Z and pick up the purchase order number, which should look like that, right? So in the AI world, what that whole problem's now changed, where the AI programs are scanning through hundreds and millions of documents through these cloud technologies. So the likes of Amazon, Google, Microsoft have these programs available which are scanning through a lot of these documents, and there are feedback loops available which trains the program to say, okay, a purchase order number could be anywhere on the document, right? That's just a simple example. Another example is spend classification. So we have invested quite heavily in our AI engine to continue to scan these the invoice data and look for keywords. Wherever there is a bolt and a spanner, we know it's a construction item. Wherever there is a paper and a pen, we can tell with confidence that it's a stationary item. So we start to categorize that spend and classify that spend. So that's how we're making use of that technology.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Arvid. Jared, I've got a question for you from an ATO perspective. payable and everything that it means for the business community. We've heard about it a lot over the last couple of years, and certainly in the last 6 to 12 months, it's become a hot topic of discussion, certainly in federal government, I think potentially in state government. What do you see as being the future of payable and e-invoicing, not only for government, but also the broader business community across Australia?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, so good question. So first of all, payable itself is a framework, and invoicing is one aspect of that framework. So there was a number of people who spoke about that whole purchase to pay and order to cash lifecycle. So first thing I'll call out is payable supports that end-to-end procure to pay lifecycle and documents that support that, like the purchase order. Secondly, in terms of the context, in Australia, in the government and in the business landscape, I guess. Before answering that, I'll talk more from a global context, right? So we're seeing a number of mandates globally on business to business and business to government. In Australia at the moment, there is a mandate on federal government agencies to be able to receive invoices. There is a mandate on New South Wales state government agencies to be able to receive rendered invoices, which could include a payable invoice. And when they receive it by a small business, there's favourable payment terms as well for them. So 5-day payment terms for those small businesses invoicing New South Wales, 5-day payment terms if you invoice federal government. There's a number of other state agencies who are on the journey in the project stage or have already moved into implementation. On the business to business side, so a couple of things I'll call out. So we've gone from 200 registered businesses to 20,000 in 12-month period. So exponential growth in the market there. We aren't having challenges that we had earlier on in the process. We've got more and more software available. So a bit alluded to it in his demonstration where he showed Xero. So there's a number of software providers coming onto the market who, as part of their subscription, they offer invoicing services, and we know that this is offered to over 1 million businesses today. So whilst it's gone from 2 to 20,000, there's a potential for 1 million today. Right, so there's lots of opportunity there for your suppliers to get on board with that journey. In terms of mandate on the business to business in Australia, there is no mandate, but what there has been is a number of consultations conducted by Treasury aimed at, I guess, avenues or ways that we can drive the adoption of e-invoicing, which comes back to that core sort of component and reason why we adopt it, so that business can recognise those efficiencies. Most recently, there was the business e-invoicing right, which occurred and closed in March this year. Now, that essentially provided a bit of certainty to business. So if a business was going to invest being able to receive e-invoices, then they could ask their suppliers to send e-invoices. So part of the journey is you need to take your suppliers on board. The business e-invoicing right would establish a bit of certainty for those businesses to say, if I'm going to invest in e-invoicing, then I have certainty that I'm going to get the benefits out of this channel, because my suppliers will be able to send them to me, or I'll have the right to ask them to send them to me through that channel. Now, we all know there's been a change of government since then. So unfortunately, you know, and it has been a range of issues, you know, that they've stepped into with high inflation and stuff. So we don't have, I guess, a clear action plan at this stage on what that means. Unfortunately, I mean, we all know that, you know, it's agnostic to government. We're all on a digital journey. Okay, so so I don't see them. You know, that's not going to change, that digital journey. Yeah, so that's kind of where we are at the moment. I will call out, I guess, promisingly as well, that Minister Jones of the federal government promoted e-invoicing and e-invoicing week on behalf of the Albanese government at the start of this week. So, you know, it's not a policy, it's not written in stone, but it is promising to see that the government of the day is getting behind this initiative.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Jared. And great to understand some of the drivers behind that, you know, sustainability being one of them, which we know is a big passion for the Albanese government. And I guess one thing from a supplier's perspective, you know, understanding payable and some of the context over the last 6 to 12 months, I think in more detail, and then logging into Xero and being able to submit your first e-invoice, it's the cleanest process ever. It's such a great process. And I think as more suppliers become aware of that capability, there'll be more pull from suppliers to ask their buying organizations to enable that channel. So it's a really fantastic initiative. We've probably got time for about 2 more questions. We have a question in the chat from Chris, and this is probably a little bit an architecture type question. From a supplier onboarding perspective, if I have, for example, SAP Ariba in my architecture, and perhaps that's connected to an SAP ERP, how do we manage that supplier onboarding process in that architecture, being mindful of things like background checks, etc.?
Good question. So first and foremost, your supplier master stays exactly where it is. And for most organizations, the vendor master is in their SAP ERP. So supplier master stays exactly where it is. The process of onboarding is really either registering a brand new supplier, right? And we can do that through SpendConsole, and we can do certain background checks. And biggest one is whether the ABN or ACN really matches that entity name. That's one of them. Second is the supplier solvent. So we query the ASIC registry to actually do that. We're working on a new feature where we can actually validate whether the bank account number they're providing also belongs to that very entity. I was surprised to learn how many suppliers actually change their bank account number, right? So a company may be registered to, ABC Private Limited, but the bank account comes in of that supplier's personal account, right? So we can onboard that supplier digitally and do these verifications, and then update that record back into your vendor master through the SpendConsole solution. That's how we do it.
Thanks so much, Arbid.
And one more point, sorry. We also check the open payable directory to see whether that supplier is actually enabled or listed on the payable directory. And if not, then we go through the process of onboarding them.
Thanks so much, Arbid. Look, one final question, I think, and I'm very mindful of time, and I think this is a question for you, Arbid. From your experience working with business across Australia over the last 20 years in this invoicing and procurement transformation space, what would you say are the key business drivers for looking at electronic invoicing? What are some of the things that I guess caused you to start thinking about this space in the first instance? And what are some of the benefits that you see, from an efficiency compliance perspective, that are real for organizations that they can start to benefit from with the introduction of something like a SpendConsole?
Yeah, look, it's really around those key themes. And I think the biggest one I see is risk, right? So having manual processes, inherently has risk of incorrect payment. We heard Brett earlier where there was a risk of hundreds of thousands of incorrect or overpayment. Yeah. Second risk is, paying suppliers in a incorrect bank account, right? And that carries reputational risk, that carries financial risk, right? So I think the biggest theme is really risk. How do we really mitigate that? And I think that's where SpendConsole or a technology like SpendConsole comes in. That then leads to really efficiencies, right? So we heard about, we're in the modern age of digital age. So why are we still dealing with paper and mailbox and everything? So what can we do to make the life of our accounts payable, finance, and business teams a lot more efficient using technology? So that leads to time savings, that leads to a better experience, that leads to elevating our AP and finance teams to a value-added function rather than a transactional function, right? Back in the 90s, businesses were outsourcing these kind of functions to low-cost countries, right? But I think we're past that, right? There is no such thing in my mind as a low-cost country or anything. Even those operations need to be elevated to a value-added function. So how do we use technology for value-add? And I think then finally it leads to compliance, right? So compliance to the right process, compliance to the right buying channel, compliance to government mandate, compliance to procurement mandate. So those are the three key themes, risk, efficiencies, and compliance as to why businesses would or should consider something like this.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Arbit. I think we have one more question, but I am mindful of time, so perhaps we'll park that one and we can get back to the mighty Dougal on that, because it is a great question. So I guess in wrapping up, thank you so much to all of our presenters, Arbit Ali from SpendConsole, Jared Wellings from the ATO, and of course, Stephen and Nick from SAP. We really appreciate you guys sharing your insights and thoughts today. I hope everyone appreciated the session, perhaps got something out of that. Please do feel free to get in touch with any of the people on this call if you've got any questions, any queries, and we look forward to working with you and continuing this discussion moving forward. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.